A spiritual retreat in rural England promised enlightenment. What emerged was systematic abuse, hidden behind scripture and smiles. Most people assume cult leaders are obvious charismatic showmen with wild eyes and messianic delusions. We've built a mental model, the madman preaching from a compound, his followers hollow-eyed and broken. But I've read through court documents from the Children of Light case, and that assumption crumbles fast. This wasn't a compound. It wasn't even a single location. It was something far more insidious, a network that looked, on the surface, like exactly what it claimed to be. In the 1980s, a group calling themselves the Children of Light established what they marketed as a spiritual retreat center in the Cotswolds. Not a cult, not a commune, a retreat. The distinction mattered enormously. It meant families could drop their children off for weeks at a time, assured they were in the hands of enlightened teachers. Parents read testimonials. They saw photographs of kids in gardens, smiling. The literature spoke of inner development and spiritual awakening. It all checked out. The accepted story, the one that circulated in local papers at the time, was straightforward. A handful of idealistic educators had created an alternative learning environment. A bit unconventional, sure. Some raised eyebrows about the isolation, the restricted contact with parents, but nothing criminal, nothing systematic, just different. I want to believe that version too. It's cleaner, it's less disturbing. But the testimony that emerged years later, from survivors, from social workers, from the few staff members who eventually came forward, painted something entirely different. The retreat wasn't a front, it was the actual mechanism. The Children of Light operated on a principle I've seen in smaller cults, though rarely executed so methodically: isolation masquerading as spiritual discipline. Children were separated from their parents not once but repeatedly. Letters home were screened, phone calls were monitored. The stated reason was always the same: external attachments distract from inner work. It sounded profound, it was control. The leadership centered around a man I'll call by his actual surname. Brennan taught a doctrine that positioned him as spiritually advanced, almost infallible. Children were told his interpretations of scripture were beyond question. Staff were expected to model absolute obedience, and obedience in this context meant participating in what was euphemistically called correction, physical punishment, sleep deprivation. Psychological manipulation dressed up as spiritual teaching. Here's what I found striking in the records. The abuse wasn't random or impulsive. It was scheduled. Correction sessions appeared in the daily timetable, right there between meditation and lunch. Children knew when they'd be punished. They lived in anticipation of it. That's not cruelty born of passion, that's institutional violence. The parents, meanwhile, received carefully curated letters. Your child is making excellent progress, they'd read. We see real spiritual growth. Some parents visited, always announced in advance, always supervised. The children had been coached on what to say. The buildings had been cleaned. The bruises, the ones that existed, were hidden or explained away as accident. What finally cracked the story open wasn't a dramatic rescue or a whistleblower's crisis of conscience. It was a single child who ran away. A girl, age 14, who walked 3 miles in the dark to the nearest village and told a shopkeeper what was happening. She was specific, she was consistent, and crucially, she was believed. The investigation that followed revealed something worse than the initial abuse allegations. There was financial exploitation. Parents had paid thousands for their children's spiritual education. There was sexual abuse by senior staff members. There were children who'd been there so long they'd internalized the ideology completely, defending their abusers with the fervor of true believers. But here's the crucial shift in understanding. The Children of Light wasn't a cult because it was weird or spiritual. It was a cult because it weaponized the parent-child relationship itself. It used the language of enlightenment to justify control. It exploited the fact that children are, by definition, vulnerable to authority, and it did all of this while maintaining the appearance of legitimacy. The real explanation, the one that emerged in testimony and court findings, wasn't that Brennan was a lunatic. He was methodical, intelligent. He understood psychology well enough to exploit it. He knew how to make abuse feel inevitable, even deserved. That's far more dangerous than madness because it's replicable, it's teachable. The Children of Light was eventually shut down in 1993. Brennan and several staff members faced prosecution. Some served time. The children were removed and placed with family or in protective care. But the psychological scars, those don't close on a court date. Many survivors reported years of difficulty trusting authority figures, forming relationships, even understanding what normal parenting looked like. What troubles me most, having studied this case, is how easily it was enabled. Inspectors visited and found nothing amiss. Parents trusted the paperwork. The community saw a quiet retreat center in the countryside and asked no hard questions. We want to believe that institutions that claim to help children are actually doing so. That assumption is our vulnerability. The Children of Light teaches us something uncomfortable. Cults don't announce themselves. They don't wear obvious badges. They look like what they claim to be until the moment they don't. And by then, the damage is already done. The children have already learned to obey. The parents have already surrendered oversight. The system has already normalized the abuse. Today, the site of the Children of Light retreat no longer exists in that form. The buildings have been repurposed or demolished. The survivors are scattered, many living quietly, processing what happened to them in private. But the case remains a stark reminder. The greatest threat to vulnerable people often doesn't come from what looks dangerous. It comes from what looks safe. Subscribe to this channel. New cult histories and the darker patterns of control are uncovered every week.